Chapter 3591. Numbers really can't make up the difference. The intelligence of the outer gods was suppressed by the formation, reducing them to almost mindless zombies with only instincts, unable to think. However, outer gods with 4 wings or more, due to their sufficient power, could resist part of the formation suppression, so they still possessed some intelligence. But that intelligence was too weak, like that of a 3 to 4-year-old child, not very useful. Most of the time, 4-winged outer gods also acted on instinct, unable to think about what they should do. As Lin Moyu killed his way through, destroying many villages and slaying tens of thousands of 4-winged outer gods, he observed the situation closely. It wasn't until the 6-winged outer gods that true intelligence appeared. They could finally think and take initiative to do things. 6-winged outer gods were equivalent to 7th-grade innate soul great Tao realm beings, no longer considered weak. Even among the outer god forces, they were main combat forces. That they could resist the formation and have their own thoughts was quite normal. So when the 6-winged outer gods discovered the situation in the villages and gathered a large army, Lin Moyu wasn't surprised at all. Rather, he felt this was how it should be. Since he entered the formation, so much time had passed without the outer gods ever resisting him. He was getting bored, so this would be a good chance for a real battle. But there was one issue that Lin Moyu still couldn't understand. He always felt there shouldn't be so many outer gods. He didn't know exactly how many outer gods were sealed back then, but even after so many years, they shouldn't have reproduced this much. Lin Moyu always trusted his intuition. If outer gods had such reproductive ability, the outcome of the origin catastrophe back then might have been different. Under his undead eye, the outer god army all turned into soul flames. The strength and numbers of the army were laid bare.
1 6-winged, 100 4-winged, 10,000 2-winged. This should be the composition model of an outer god legion. It looks quite reasonable, but unfortunately the numbers.
Compared to the undead army in numbers, it was like a drop in the ocean worlds apart. Even if the undead army's combat power wasn't as good as the outer gods with the numerical advantage, they could at least hold out for a long time. 10,000 versus 100 billion, a difference of 10 million times. Even if the undead army just stood there to be killed, it would take a long time. And that time was enough for Lin Moyu to blow them up. Against divine pets, the undead army was a powerful slaughter machine. Against outer gods, the undead army was a solid meat shield. Lin Moyu took the enemy seriously, summoning 5,000 legion commanders. The commanders led their dragon cavalry legions, totaling 50 billion. In addition, there were another 50 billion skeleton god generals, all under the command of the legion commanders. The undead army filled the sky and covered the ground, occupying every corner for hundreds of kilometers around. It had become a world of the undead army. Over 100 billion undead troops pressed forward like dark clouds, without a single gap. Behind the undead army were 3,000 skeleton kings. The skeleton kings moved out together to provide support for the undead army. The more skeleton kings, the greater the boost to the undead army. Lin Moyu's body emanated an origin aura. With the support of the yin-yang origin, the origin technique was almost constantly active. At the same time, the origin aura greatly stimulated the outer gods. Facing the undead army, the outer god army charged forward frantically. The two sides collided violently. The undead troops at the very front died in large numbers instantly. Countless dragon cavalry and skeleton god generals turned to dust on the spot. Wherever the outer gods went, both dragon cavalry and skeleton god generals were utterly destroyed. The protective divine light of the outer gods gathered together like a huge ball of light, charging straight through. The 6-winged outer god flapped its wings, condensing 6 giant swords of light, sweeping across the battlefield. In an instant, it cleared out 1,000 meters of space alone, inflicting countless casualties on the undead army.
The gap in strength.
Lin Moyu murmured softly. This was the gap in strength that numbers couldn't make up for. Although the undead army had enough numbers, if this great battle continued, they would eventually be slaughtered. When the realm gap was too large, numbers really couldn't make up the difference. Moreover, the enemy could attack or retreat at will, and Lin Moyu couldn't stop them even if he wanted to. Now, even with the numerical advantage, they couldn't hold out for long. The formation would be pierced through, and the outer gods were fully capable of striking at the heart. Lin Moyu witnessed the combat power of the six-winged outer gods, which was a huge improvement over the four-winged ones. This improvement could be fully correlated to the Great Tao realm. From the outer gods, he could roughly see the corresponding combat power of the Great Tao realm.
The outer gods' attack methods are very simple. The Great Tao they use seems to be the Divine Light Great Tao, but it also incorporates power from the Metal Great Tao of the five elements. The Protective Divine Light should be the Divine Light Great Tao, incorporating power from the Earth Great Tao of the five elements. It seems the power of outer gods should come from the Divine Light Great Tao.
After so many years of interaction, Lin Moyu had seen clearly the root of the outer gods' power. Their power was very singular. So far he hadn't seen any other attributes of power. The Divine Light Great Tao also existed on the Origin continent, so outer gods could exert their full combat power on the Origin continent. Seeing the outer god forces killing their way into the undead army, constantly charging towards him, the leading six-winged outer god also understood the principle of capturing the leader first. It didn't bother with the undead army, but came straight for Lin Moyu. Lin Moyu pointed a finger, and the skeleton hell appeared in the rear half of the outer god army. The skeleton hell cut the complete outer god army into two parts. The six-winged outer god immediately turned to attack the skeleton hell. Heiyu rushed out from the skeleton hell, colliding head-on with the six-winged outer god. Heaven and earth shook violently, space cracked open, and Heiyu was sent flying back with a dragon's roar, its body badly damaged. As Heiyu flew backwards, it was cut into several pieces by the sword condensed by the six-winged outer god. In one collision, Heiyu was utterly defeated. With Heiyu's strength just entering the Great Tao realm, it was no match for the six-winged outer god at all. But it had completed its task. At the moment of collision, it helped Lin Moyu lock onto the target. Boom! An explosion sounded, and the six-winged outer god was engulfed in a violent blast. Over the years, Lin Moyu had accumulated a large number of four-winged outer god corpse fragments, which he used to deal with six-winged outer gods. There was a huge difference in strength between four-winged and six-winged, but as long as they could be injured by the explosion, numbers could be stacked. Stack up enough numbers, and they could eventually be blown up. In one explosion, Lin Moyu saw wounds appear on the six-winged outer god's body. The wounds weren't large, but blood was visible.
That'll do,
Lin Moyu said to himself, knowing his guess wasn't wrong. Using four-winged outer god corpses as raw material was enough to blow up six-winged outer gods. It was just a matter of more explosions. Corpse explosion was very unreasonable, ignoring the outer god's protective divine light and exploding directly on their bodies. Explosion after explosion without end, unstoppable. The six-winged outer god's flesh and blood flew everywhere, its wings broken, screaming incessantly. After over 100 violent explosions, its consciousness sank into darkness as it was blown to pieces. Chapter 3592. The Power of Faith in the Statue. Lin Moyu was now fully treating the outer gods as a dungeon to clear. His experience was very similar to clearing dungeons in the small world thousands of years ago. The six-winged outer god was just a slightly tougher mini-boss, not really anything special. Before dealing with it, Lin Moyu had done thorough preparation and gathered enough materials. This large-scale battle seemed massive, but in reality it was just a matter of Lin Moyu lifting his hand. The undead army appeared to suffer heavy casualties, but there weren't actually many deaths. The undying undead could be revived, and the Legion commanders would choose the right time to revive them. Throughout the entire battle, if anyone suffered the most, it was Heiyu. In order to help Lin Moyu lock onto the six-winged outer god, it personally went as bait and ended up cut into several pieces, taking a while to recover. The flesh and blood of the six-winged outer god wasn't easy to digest. The hell fiends chewed for a long time before finally digesting it. For the skeleton hell, the flesh of a six-winged outer god was great nourishment. Lin Moyu had a feeling that the faint light on the hell fiends had become stronger, and the overall defense of the skeleton hell had also increased somewhat. Even though it had already reached the peak of the 9th level of Tao Venerable Realm and seemed to have no room for improvement, it had still managed to improve a bit.
It seems the skeleton hell hasn't truly reached its limit yet. There's still some room for improvement. In that case, keep eating and see how far it can improve.
There were still many outer gods here that could become nourishment for the skeleton hell, contributing to its growth. After eliminating this army of outer gods, Lin Moyu advanced deeper into the interior. By now, the circle on the map had expanded considerably. Over a third of the entire sealed world had been explored. A town appeared on the map, much larger in scale than the previous villages. In the town were inverted triangular buildings, much larger than before. They weren't for nurturing divine pets, but contained outer gods inside. On top of the triangular buildings were altars belonging to four-winged outer gods. In the center of the town stood an altar hundreds of meters high. In front of the altar was a statue of an outer god. The statue was as tall as the altar, lifelike, with 22 wings on its back. According to the outer god system, each additional pair of wings represented a higher realm. 18 wings would be equivalent to a first-grade innate soul-grade Tao realm expert in the origin continent. So 20 or 22 wings would be even stronger. Those stronger than first-grade innate souls should be Tao lords. Lin Moyu looked at the statue.
20 wings should be equivalent to a Tao lord of an ordinary great Tao, so 22 wings would be a Tao lord of an origin great Tao. It seems this should be the strongest among the outer gods. 22 wings, with this strength, is indeed inferior to the origin continent. No wonder they had to join forces with the Black Blood Realm and find several cannon fodder worlds to attack the origin continent together.
As Lin Moyu thought this, the undead army had already invaded the town. The outer god army that had just battled him came from this town. Now there were no powerful outer gods left in the town. The few outer gods remaining in the town were insignificant. The triangular buildings opened, and some outer gods and divine pets rushed out, only to become food for the skeleton hell. The triangular buildings continuously collapsed, and this simple town quickly became ruins. The skeleton hell swept through, with the hell fiends eating everything and erasing all traces left by the outer gods. When the undead army reached the statue in the center of town, the statue suddenly burst with brilliant light. A phantom of an outer god appeared. Though the statue had 22 wings, the phantom it produced didn't have 22 wings. The phantom was only an 8-winged outer god. Though it had one more pair of wings, its power was even weaker than the 6-winged one just killed. Lin Moyu didn't take it seriously at all. The skeleton hell enveloped it, quickly locking on, followed by continuous explosions. After over a dozen explosions, the statue collapsed and the seemingly 8-winged outer god phantom dissipated into smoke. As it disappeared, Lin Moyu faintly heard an angry roar. Lin Moyu knew there was indeed an 8-winged outer god behind the statue. It had left a trace of its will in the statue, constantly receiving worship from its people here. From the collapsed statue fragments, Lin Moyu could still sense the aura of faith power.
Unexpectedly, outer gods also like faith power. It seems this faith power isn't as simple as imagined. Perhaps there are some secrets within it.
Lin Moyu hadn't deeply researched faith power. He also hadn't expected outer gods to use faith power, which was quite surprising. If there's a chance in the future, he could research it. There might be some unexpected surprises. Just an hour later, this town had completely vanished from the world. Lin Moyu left without looking back, disappearing without a trace. Since the 8-winged outer god had discovered him, he would slip away. He didn't want to directly confront the 8-winged outer god yet. He preferred to advance step by step, level by level. When he had enough materials on hand, he would go cause trouble for the 8-winged outer god. No rush, Lin Moyu was very patient. Lin Moyu flew quickly along the map, traveling very far this time. He passed through half the area, arriving before another town. Lin Moyu's sudden arrival alarmed the outer gods in the town. A 6-winged outer god led an army to attack. The undead army deployed again, working with the skeleton hell to clear out the outer gods. Facing the well-prepared Lin Moyu, the outer god army was quickly wiped out. The leading six-winged outer god was reduced to ashes under hundreds of corpse explosions. There was also a statue in the town. Lin Moyu cleared out the entire town first, then dealt with the statue last. Using the same method to quickly resolve the statue, Lin Moyu left without looking back, searching for the next target. Each target was very far apart. Lin Moyu wouldn't give the enemy a chance to chase. There were many towns in this area, enough for him to choose from and clear one by one. Clearing east and west like this, the efficiency was much slower but very stable. Finally, after clearing over 100 towns, the outer gods in the towns disappeared. He searched 5 towns in a row with the same situation. The outer gods in the towns had vanished without a trace. Not only were the outer gods gone, even the statues in the towns had disappeared. When leaving, the outer gods had taken the statues, leaving only empty towns.
There's faith power in the statues, seems they couldn't bear to part with it. What use does faith power have for outer gods? They seem to value it highly. The outer gods who left should be gathering to prepare for a big battle with me.
Lin Moyu didn't care about this. He continued with his original plan, clearing out towns. Besides killing outer gods, erasing all traces of their existence was also a very important task. Town after town disappeared under the Hell Fiend's devouring, leaving no remnants. Finally, after clearing out most of the towns, Lin Moyu saw the outer gods' army. Chapter 3593. The Great Tao Array Sect is finished. Looking at the army of outer gods, Lin Moyu revealed a faint smile. Under the formation suppression, the outer gods lacked intelligence and were defeated one by one. But this decision somewhat exceeded expectations. At the head of the army was a 10-winged outer god. This outer god emanated a terrifying aura, its gaze coldly fixed on Lin Moyu. Behind it were 10 8-winged outer gods. Further back were 100 6-winged outer gods, followed by 4-winged and 2-winged ones. In addition, there were over 1 million divine pets. The divine pets were just cannon fodder. The 2-winged and 4-winged outer gods were the main force of the army. There were hundreds of thousands of 2-winged outer gods and thousands of 4-winged ones.
This is going to be the decisive battle. It seems all the outer gods are here now. If we win this battle, the great changes in heaven and earth will officially begin.
Lin Moyu had a feeling this would be the most important battle for the Origin continent to initiate the great changes. As long as they could win this battle, the Origin continent could return to its peak state. If they lost this battle, who knows how long they'd have to wait for the next chance. Over these years, although the heaven-sealing Tao-severing formation sealed the outer gods, it gave them a chance to recover and reproduce. No one expected the outer gods to reproduce so quickly. If this continued, their numbers would keep increasing until they filled the entire formation space. Lin Moyu believed these outer gods must also be thinking of ways to break through the formation seal. The leading 10-winged outer god's eyes were no longer dull. It could think, had intelligence, and would find ways. Lin Moyu's mind quickly flashed through the villages and towns he had seen since entering. Those tall altars. Combining the map in his mind, he discovered some clues.
Those altar statues do seem a bit like some kind of formation, probably belonging to the outer gods. They've been trying to break through the heaven-sealing Tao-severing formation, but have never succeeded. But as long as they keep at it, with their numbers growing and strength increasing, they'll break through the formation one day. If that happens, it will be another great disaster for the Origin continent. There may not necessarily be a second world-sealing Tao Lord to seal them again. Now they haven't broken through yet, but just the leaked power has already caused anomalies in a vast sea area.
Lin Moyu suddenly realized something. The heaven-sealing Tao-severing formation set up by the world-sealing Tao Lord back then definitely wasn't like it is now. The heaven-sealing Tao-severing formation should have been able to suppress all the outer gods' intelligence and thoughts, turning them into mindless zombies. As long as these outer gods lost their intelligence, the divine pets would eventually die out due to lifespan issues. Once the divine pets died out completely, the outer gods' reproduction would come to a complete end. Moreover, outer gods without intelligence, only instinct, couldn't possibly build villages and towns of this scale, let alone try to break through the formation. All these problems stemmed from the Great Tao Array sect. The formation masters of the Great Tao Array sect tampered with the heaven-sealing Tao-severing formation, creating loopholes. This allowed the strongest outer gods to regain their intelligence. Once they regained intelligence, they naturally planned how to escape. Escape required enormous power, so they would order their subordinates to start reproducing, building villages and towns, setting up formations belonging to the realm of gods, and collecting faith power. The weaker outer gods, though lacking self-awareness and intelligence, would still follow orders. Whatever they were told to do, they would do. The formation originally meant to seal them instead became their best breeding ground. It was indeed somewhat laughable. The culprit behind all this was the Great Tao Array sect. Back then, the world-sealing Tao Lord knew the Great Tao Array sect had tampered with it, and he allowed it. He also knew that after the tampering, the formation would have flaws and some changes would occur inside, but he still allowed it. And afterwards, he chose to commit suicide, completely severing his karmic ties with the heaven-sealing Tao-severing formation. All karma would be borne by the Great Tao Array sect. This matter caused extreme harm to the Great Tao of the origin continent. The world-sealing Tao Lord was dead, so the Great Tao couldn't find anyone. In the end, it would all be counted against the Great Tao Array sect. Lin Moyu knew that once the problems here were resolved and the great changes began, the Great Tao Array sect would be finished. Not just punished as previously thought, but truly finished.
The world-sealing Tao Lord was ruthless.
Lin Moyu sighed inwardly. Someone who dared to single-handedly confront the Great Tao Array sect couldn't be kind-hearted. The Great Tao Array sect was completely schemed to death by him, dead beyond dead. But what did this have to do with him? The Great Tao Array sect had no favors and only enmity with him. Their downfall wasn't a bad thing for him. Moreover, Lin Moyu felt the world-sealing Tao Lord schemes weren't just this much. After his death, he reincarnated as Waterstop Tianzuan, surely with deeper plans. These big shots were all scheming back and forth. Compared to the world-sealing Tao Lord, the third ancestor and beast emperor seemed somewhat lacking. As he pondered, the outer god army had already charged over. The undead army, under the Legion commander's direction, also launched their attack. This time, the entire undead army was deployed. Except for some left with Lillian in the western continent, all other undead troops were summoned. Nearly 200 billion troops firmly occupied the heavens and earth. In terms of numbers, the outer god army of just a few million was nothing. But in terms of real combat power, the nearly 200 billion undead troops seemed somewhat inadequate. The two armies collided. The outer god army was like a blade, tearing through the defensive net formed by the undead army. The 10-winged outer god released dazzling light from its entire body, like the Tai Yong origin. Wherever the light reached, the undead army was completely incinerated. A huge gap was torn in the undead army. The 10-winged outer god charged straight for Lin Moyu. Lin Moyu retreated, moving away from the battlefield. At the same time, he pointed a finger, and the skeleton hell appeared on the battlefield. Heiyu charged out, rushing towards the 10-winged outer god like a suicide attack. But before it could get close, it was already engulfed in flames like the undead army. Even the skeleton hell couldn't escape, quickly catching fire. Fortunately, after devouring many outer gods, the skeleton hell had gained the characteristics of protective divine light and could hold on for a while. Heiyu, covered in flames, crashed into an 8-winged outer god. The 8-winged outer god flapped its wings, transforming into a sword, and swiftly cut Heiyu into pieces. From the skeleton hell, countless hell fiends rushed over. Though none could reach the outer gods, they all suffered attacks from the outer gods.
Success.
The lock-on was complete. Lin Moyu moved the skeleton hell out of the battlefield with a thought, while taking out the essence blood ball left by the third ancestor and activating it with his soul. The essence blood ball shot over with a bloody light, piercing through the protective divine light and entering the outer god's battle formation, instantly killing an 8-winged outer god. The eight-winged outer god's soul was annihilated as it fell from the sky. The essence blood ball killed so quickly that even Lin Moyu couldn't react in time.
The third ancestor's methods are indeed extraordinary.
Lin Moyu chuckled softly, using this eight-winged outer god's corpse as raw material to perform corpse explosion. He simultaneously locked onto 5 eight-winged outer gods. 10 drops of ancestral water flew out, landing on the technique star. Faith power burned fiercely, enhancing the technique's power to the extreme. Chapter 3594. It's been a while since I've exploded like this. Lin Moyu had no problem exploding 2 at once, having tried it many times. In the previous massacres, Lin Moyu repeatedly tested the limits of corpse explosion. The limit was exploding 4 at once, with no possibility of failure. If he tried to explode 5 simultaneously, there was a chance of failure, unable to kill all 5. But this time, Lin Moyu used 10 drops of ancestral water, plus faith power. With these 2 enhancements, the technique's power would increase greatly, so exploding 5 at once shouldn't be a problem. Boom! 5 explosions, but only 1 sound. 5 eight-winged outer gods died on the spot, without even a chance to groan. There were only 10 eight-winged outer gods in total. 1 was killed by the essence blood ball, 5 were blown up in 1 corpse explosion, leaving only 4. Lin Moyu didn't hold back at all, quickly locking onto them for another round of spectacular explosions. 4 outer gods comparable to 6th grade innate soul great Tao realm beings were killed cleanly and decisively, without even a chance to resist. 10 eight-winged outer gods died within 2 seconds, greatly weakening the entire outer god army's combat power. The leading 10-winged outer god's eyes were full of shock. Couldn't understand what had happened, why its 10 strongest subordinates had died just like that. But there was no chance for it to figure things out. Explosion after explosion bloomed like fireworks among the outer god ranks. Lin Moyu said it had been a long time since he'd exploded so satisfyingly. The last time he exploded like this was when clearing dungeons in the small world. In the great world, the enemies he faced were either too weak or too few in number. He hadn't been able to explode to his heart's content for a long time. Today, he could explode to his full satisfaction.
It's been so long since I've exploded like this. How refreshing.
At this moment, Lin Moyu truly felt like he was back in the small world clearing dungeons. He had thought before that the small world seemed deliberately designed. Many scenarios he encountered later in the human world and origin continent seemed to have appeared in the small world before. It was as if someone intentionally let him experience events that would happen in the future, allowing him to accumulate experience. This method was indeed very effective. The dungeons of the small world and the secret realms of the great world actually had some commonalities. The image of the green-robed old man unconsciously appeared in his mind again.
It was all you, wasn't it, green-robed old man?
Lin Moyu thought to himself, cursing him first regardless of whether it was true or not. Explosion sounds rumbled endlessly, filling the battlefield. The entire battle became a fireworks show, except the fireworks were made of flesh and blood instead of gunpowder. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, covering the entire battlefield. The skeleton hell returned to the battlefield, with hell fiends devouring flesh and blood to strengthen themselves. The 10-winged outer god was stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. The army that took countless years to breed was just gone like this? Lin Moyu understood its expression. Though they couldn't communicate verbally, eyes don't lie.
Sometimes, lacking intelligence has its benefits. At least there's no worry or fear.
Thinking this, his hands didn't stop. Corpse explosion after corpse explosion was thrown out, the flesh and blood fireworks continuing. 10 minutes later, it finally quieted down. Of the million-strong outer god army, only 1 remained. The 10-winged outer god became a lone commander, staring blankly at everything, unable to react for a moment. While it was dazed, the undead army wouldn't stand idle. They silently surrounded it completely. The skeleton god generals and dragon cavalry that had died earlier were all revived now. Nearly 200 billion undead troops surrounded the 10-winged outer god, forming who knows how many layers. Lin Moyu clapped his hands.
Hey!
200 billion against one. Even with a huge power difference, they could wear it out through sheer numbers. Even if they couldn't do much to it, at least it wouldn't be able to escape. The 10-winged outer god finally reacted, roaring repeatedly, its voice full of hatred. Flames ignited in its protective divine light. Any skeleton god general or dragon cavalry that touched it died instantly. The 10-winged outer god charged towards Lin Moyu like a madman, but it was already submerged in the undead sea, unable to break out. It couldn't even find Lin Moyu's exact location. Its lock on Lin Moyu had long been severed. The Legion commanders jointly controlled the undead sea. The undead sea wasn't a real sea, it could move. Wherever the 10-winged outer god charged, the undead sea rolled there, keeping it forever at the center of the encirclement. Lin Moyu wasn't in a hurry. He'd play along, wearing it out through exhaustion if nothing else. The skeleton hell finally had its fill. With a spatial distortion, the skeleton hell re-entered the battlefield, enveloping the 10-winged outer god. The skeleton hell's entire body emitted a faint light, resisting the 10-winged outer god's flames. Through the skeleton hell's special properties, Lin Moyu firmly locked onto it. A large number of corpse fragments appeared beside him, from the recently killed 8-winged, 6-winged, 4-winged, and 2-winged outer gods, numbering over 1 million. Locking onto it, Corpse Explosion began its performance once again. The explosion sounds that had just died down moments ago started up again, this time non-stop. Regardless of whether it worked or not, Lin Moyu's principle was to explode first and ask questions later, starting with the weakest. Corpse Explosion using 2-winged outer god fragments didn't have much effect, completely ignored by the 10-winged outer god. Then 4-winged ones weren't much better. The power increased significantly, but was still ignored, until 6-winged outer god fragments turned to dust, finally causing some damage. The 10-winged outer god shuddered violently in the explosion, a finger-sized hole appearing on its body. The damage wasn't great, just a tiny bit, but it was enough to give Lin Moyu hope. Once Lin Moyu found it effective, he never stopped. One after another, he had hundreds of 6-winged outer god materials and didn't hold back at all, using them freely. As long as it could kill the enemy, it was worth it. Explosions sounded non-stop. The 10-winged outer god was blasted so much it could barely maintain its form, staggering. Blood sprayed from its wounds. It roared and screamed incessantly, but to no avail. At this point, Lin Moyu had plenty of ways to kill it. If Corpse Explosion wasn't enough, he still had the Disaster Scepter. As long as he found the right moment, he didn't believe he couldn't smash it to death. In explosion after explosion, flesh and blood flew from its body, its soul growing weaker. It was injured, and its injuries were getting worse. Strike while the iron is hot. Lin Moyu kicked it while it was down, exploding even harder. After using up hundreds of 6-winged outer god fragments, he immediately switched to 8-winged outer god fragments. There were only 8-winged outer god fragments, but it was already severely injured. He calculated it should be enough. After 8 consecutive explosions, the 10-winged outer god's body shattered, on the verge of death. Still wasn't dead. What tenacious vitality! Lin Moyu was somewhat surprised. Though not dead, it had no strength left to resist. Even its protective divine light was almost shattered. The skeleton hell took the stage, with hell fiends pouncing on it, frantically biting. The newly recovered Heiyu rushed out, biting down on it, dragon teeth grinding forcefully. Chapter 3595. Sacrifice. Blasted to the brink of death, the 10-winged outer god's last bit of life was finally harvested by the skeleton hell. The 10-winged outer god was very strong. Lin Moyu had to use almost all his methods except the Disaster Scepter, even depleting all the accumulated Corpse Explosion raw materials to barely kill it.
Hopefully there won't be any 12-winged outer gods.
Lin Moyu muttered softly as a piece of the 10-winged outer god's flesh fell into his hand. The rest was devoured by the hell fiends and Heiyu. For the skeleton hell, this was an extremely sumptuous feast, second only to the blood-red Great Tao among all its grand banquets. The special abilities contained within the outer gods were also digested and absorbed, becoming abilities of the skeleton hell. Everything in the skeleton hell, including the Higginbana, now emitted a hazy glow. Without an increase in realm, the skeleton hell's combat power had still increased by at least 20%. While cleaning up the battlefield, hundreds of billions of undead troops dispersed and flew deeper into the area. Most of this area had now been explored, with only the last third remaining. Lin Moyu felt that the Outer Gods' main force had already been deployed. Any more Outer Gods encountered would at most be just a few stragglers, no longer a threat. Though he thought this, there was still a faint unease in his heart. The unease came from the Outer God statues. The statue was of a 22-winged Outer God, a terrifying existence comparable to the Tao Lord of an origin great Tao. He wasn't very clear on the significance of the statue's existence, whether it was purely for worship and commemoration, or if it had other uses. The answer would soon be revealed. The ground ahead was vast and flat, as if deliberately smoothed, with traces of artificial polishing. On the ground stood altar after altar. The altars seemed to form a special pattern, continuously extending towards the center. The closer to the center, the taller and grander the altars became. The outer altars were only 100 meters tall, but they grew progressively higher. Before even reaching the center, the altars had exceeded 1,000 meters and were still growing larger. After Lin Moyu arrived, he saw some special traces left by the statues beside the altars, indicating that there had previously been Outer God statues next to the altars. But now they had been moved away. This discovery made Lin Moyu more certain that the statues likely had other uses. Since the altars appeared, there were no more villages or towns. The undead army still advanced inward in circles according to the previous plan. No Outer Gods were encountered along the way, as if all the Outer Gods had already died, until they reached the center, where an enormous palace appeared in view. In the undead eye, there were many soul flames inside and outside the palace. The owners of these soul flames were all Outer Gods, numbering over 100,000. Additionally, the outside of the palace was filled with statues that had been moved here from various towns, villages, and altars. The Outer Gods seemed to be performing some kind of ritual, kneeling and kowtowing towards the palace one by one. They continuously made strange sounds from their mouths. Though incomprehensible, the sounds contained a certain rhythm. Seeing this scene, Lin Moyu's heart skipped a beat, feeling that something not good was about to happen. Then, several statues suddenly emitted strong light, flowing like water into the palace. Inside the palace, a powerful aura was awakening. This palace was somewhat special, filled with the power of the great Tao. The undead eye couldn't penetrate it to see the interior situation. Lin Moyu didn't think much and immediately rushed over, while ordering the nearest undead troops to attack the palace. No matter what ritual these Outer Gods were performing or what they were trying to do, it certainly couldn't be anything good. The undead army charged towards the palace but was blocked by an invisible force when still 10,000 meters away. This force had no offensive power, just like an invisible wall preventing the undead army from advancing an inch. The undead army continuously attacked, but all attacks were like cows entering the sea, not causing even a ripple. The ritual continued, with statue after statue turning into streams of light entering the palace. The aura in the palace grew stronger and stronger. Lin Moyu arrived and pointed a finger, naturally sending out the skeleton hell. Countless hell fiends pounced on the invisible wall, frantically gnawing. The hell fiends truly ate anything, even invisible walls, though the eating speed was somewhat slow. Heiyu rushed out with dragon roars, its tail lashing out like a whip against the invisible wall. But its attacks were equally ineffective, all blocked. Even the dragon scales on Heiyu's tail cracked, unable to do anything to the invisible wall. The invisible wall had no offensive power, and the skeleton hell couldn't use it to lock onto the Outer Gods inside and outside the palace. Lin Moyu tried to send his soul power over but was also blocked. Unable to break through, he could only watch helplessly as more and more statues turned into streams of light. The palace's aura grew increasingly powerful, waves of pressure emanating. The being inside the palace was about to awaken. Lin Moyu could see that these outer god statues were actually carriers of faith power. Through some special ritual method, the outer gods had turned faith power into strength, awakening one of their beings. Based on the properties of faith power, this awakening should be temporary. Once the faith power was exhausted, the being would fall back into slumber. So his battle strategy should focus on stalling. But what happened next exceeded Lin Moyu's expectations. The ritual continued, with fewer and fewer statues remaining until they were all depleted. The being in the palace still hadn't awakened. Clearly, the faith power in these statues wasn't enough for it to revive. Then, one by one, the outer gods themselves turned into streams of light, rushing into the palace. The outer gods sacrificed themselves just to revive the being in the palace. 100,000 outer gods, equivalent to 100,000 great Tao realm beings. Their combined power was astonishing. The palace rumbled incessantly, waves of pressure emanating, making it hard to breathe. Lin Moyu's brow furrowed slightly. He could see that this palace itself was a powerful treasure, and the being slumbering inside the palace must be even more powerful.
It should be more than 12 wings, at least 14 wings.
14 wings were equivalent to a third-grade innate soul great Tao realm being, a top expert in the heavenly Tao realm. Using all his methods, he couldn't possibly fight a 14-winged outer god. Even with the disaster scepter, it would be very difficult. He simply couldn't get close. But at this point, this battle couldn't be avoided. Lin Moyu willed the disaster scepter to appear in his hand, looking at its 3 gems.
It's up to you now.
The only thing he could rely on now was the disaster scepter. Perhaps the balance gem could have an effect. If it could balance down the opponent's realm, there would be no need to fight. If not, this would really be troublesome. 100,000 outer gods completed their sacrifice. The palace burst with dazzling light, and the invisible wall disappeared. From within the palace, an outer god slowly flew out. The palace rapidly shrank and transformed, finally becoming golden armor worn by the outer god. Lin Moyu's eyes narrowed sharply.
16 wings.
3596. One sword to sever the soul. The result was even worse than expected. Lin Moyu had already tried to imagine the worst outcome, but the outer god before him wasn't 14-winged, but 16-winged. A 16-winged outer god was equivalent to a second-grade innate soul great Tao realm being. The gap between himself and the opponent was countless realms apart, making it impossible to fight. The difference in levels and increase in strength wasn't linear, but grew exponentially. Especially for the later realms, each realm difference meant an earth-shattering change in strength. Lin Moyu sensed danger, his intuition constantly warning him. His current situation was extremely perilous. Even with 200 billion undead troops as a shield, they couldn't protect him. Since he began cultivating, he had encountered countless dangers big and small, but none compared to now. Who knew why such a powerful outer god would appear here? The time curse wings spread open as Lin Moyu rapidly retreated, while the undead army firmly surrounded the 16-winged outer god. If the opponent had any weakness, it was that its power didn't come from itself. Faith power would eventually be exhausted. If he could stall for enough time, there might still be a chance of victory. The key was he couldn't stall. The outer god slowly opened its eyes. Its protective divine light erupted violently as it instantly transformed into a blazing sun, illuminating the earth like the Tai Yong origin. Wherever the light reached, the undead army swiftly perished. In just the blink of an eye, casualties had already exceeded 100 million. The undead army launched attacks at the opponent's sword chi, charges the Skeleton King's bone sword slash. Countless attacks fell like raindrops, but had no effect whatsoever. The 1,000-meter range protective divine light became its absolute domain. All attacks not permitted by it were completely blocked outside. Now the only thing that could attack it was corpse explosion. The problem was, Lin Moyu only had one piece of 10-winged outer god flesh fragment. It was impossible to blow it up to death, and even injuring it was unlikely. The power gap was too great, beyond imagination. At this moment, even Lin Moyu was extremely troubled. He did have the ability to fight across realms, even across boundaries, but this gap was too large. The difference between him and the opponent was like that between an ordinary person and a Tao Venerable. There was simply no comparison. Under the illumination of the protective divine light, in just a few seconds, the undead army's casualties had exceeded 100 million. At this time, a golden spear appeared in its hand, while the 16 wings behind it simultaneously transformed into spear shadows. Boom! The spear swept across, space cracking everywhere. Heaven and earth were emptied. With just a casual sweep, over 10 billion undead troops were killed. Though there seemed to be 400 billion undead troops that could revive repeatedly, they couldn't last long. The power gap was simply too great, to the point where various methods could hardly make up for it. Lin Moyu's brow furrowed tightly as his mind raced, thinking of countermeasures. This battle was indeed the most difficult he had faced since he began cultivating. No method was guaranteed to work. He could only try and see. With a thought, the skeleton hell appeared, trying to envelop the opponent. Before the hell fiends could pounce, before Heyu could even roar, the skeleton hell was already torn to shreds by the protective divine light. Boom! The spear swept across again. 19 spear shadows appeared in the sky. Large swaths of the undead army perished. Lin Moyu couldn't care about these anymore. No matter what, the skeleton hell had completed the lock-on. The 10-winged outer god flesh fragment appeared in his hand, then turned to ash. Along with it, 100 drops of ancestral water and endless faith power also turned to ash.
Origine level technique, corpse explosion.
Boom! An explosion occurred on the 16-winged outer god's body. It merely trembled slightly to no effect. Lin Moyu found that his lock-on had been severed. Then a gaze fell on him, setting off frantic alarms in his intuition. His attack had drawn the opponent's attention. The undead army couldn't block its gaze. Without thinking, Lin Moyu immediately retreated, not daring to stop for a moment. Just as he left, space suddenly shattered where he had been standing, a spear shadow flashing past. The 16-winged outer god swiftly pursued. All the undead troops blocking its path were simultaneously destroyed, unable to hold for even a second. Lin Moyu's speed was far inferior. The distance between them was rapidly closing. Lin Moyu's soul power surged frantically into the disaster scepter as he shouted,
Balance!
With all other methods ineffective, Lin Moyu could only rely on the disaster scepter. The disaster scepter didn't disappoint Lin Moyu. The balance gem was activated, radiating light that covered heaven and earth. The balance gem's function was simple to balance. It balanced everything, including power, realm, and so on. Lin Moyu felt his realm and power increasing. Compared to the undead army, he at only the 7th level of Tao Venerable Realm was indeed the weakest. But this wasn't important. What mattered was the 16-winged outer god. The wings on the 16-winged outer god's back grew dimmer, its power decreasing.
The balance gem is working.
Just as Lin Moyu was about to breathe a sigh of relief, he suddenly noticed the 16-winged outer god's aura had stopped changing. A pair of wings on its back burst with dazzling light, then dimmed. This pair of wings seemed to have sacrificed all its power to prevent the outer god's strength from decreasing further. It changed from 16 wings to 14 wings. Though it had decreased slightly, killing Lin Moyu was still very easy. The disaster scepter failed for the first time. Lin Moyu realized the disaster scepter also had limits, and those limits were determined by himself. It was his own lack of strength that restricted the disaster scepter's effectiveness. The outer god, now reduced to 14 wings, raised its spear again. 15 spear shadows appeared in the sky. Terrifying power swept through the entire space, leaving nowhere to dodge. Boom! Lin Moyu's body exploded on the spot. He couldn't withstand it and was blasted to pieces. The next second, purple light flashed and Lin Moyu revived again. Fortunately, the new life talent still worked. Otherwise, he would have truly died. Seeing Lin Moyu hadn't died, the 14-winged outer god raised its spear again. Suddenly, a clear shout rang out. A sword light came from 10,000 miles away, arriving instantly as if teleporting, fiercely slashing down on the outer god. The outer god was slashed to the ground. The earth shook violently, revealing countless cracks. A huge crater appeared where it crashed. The outer god was forcibly slashed into the pit. This sudden development made Lin Moyu pause briefly before smiling.
Big Sis is awesome.
Lin Mohan appeared in the air, her cold voice shouting.
Don't be afraid, little brother. Big Sis is here.
Lin Moyu looked helpless.
I'm not afraid.
Though the opponent was strong and difficult to deal with, at worst he would die in battle. As for fear, he really wasn't at that point. Lin Moyu indicated he was long used to death. Real death or fake death made no difference to him. As a cultivator, how could he speak of fear? But Lin Moyu was very curious why Lin Mohan suddenly appeared here. When did she enter? How did she enter? Moreover, why was Lin Mohan's power so strong now? A 14-winged outer god was equivalent to a third-grade innate soul great Tao realm being. No matter how good Lin Mohan's talent was, even with the help of blood resonance, she shouldn't be able to reach this level. The outer god burst out of the pit, swinging its spear to attack again. Lin Mohan shouted softly, her sword flying above her head as she pointed.
One sword to sever the soul.